The ocean churned with a restless fury, its waves smashing against the shore under the cloak of night. Tom Neale stood motionless at the edge of the wharf, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if it held the answers to questions he couldn't voice. The salty air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed by the journey ahead, a leap into the unknown. It was 1952, and Neale, a man in search of meaning, was about to trade the familiar cacophony of society for the profound silence of an uninhabited island. Why would anyone willingly embrace such solitude? For Neale, it wasn't a choice but a calling. The humdrum of civilization felt like a cage, while the untouched beauty of Suwarrow beckoned like a siren's song. Suwarrow, a remote atoll in the Cook Islands, was a place few dared to tread. Its isolation was both its peril and its promise. For Neale, it was an escape and an experiment, a test of human resilience against the raw elements of nature. This is the story of Tom Neale, the man who survived alone on Suwarrow and proved that the human spirit can endure even the deepest isolation. Tom Neale was no stranger to the allure of the Pacific. Born in New Zealand in 1902, he had spent much of his life moving from one odd job to another, often finding work on ships that traversed the vast ocean. These voyages exposed him to the untouched beauty of the Pacific Islands, planting a seed of longing deep within him. He yearned for a life untainted by modernity, a life where he could reconnect with nature and himself. The idea of Suwarrow took root in Neale's mind during a brief visit to the atoll in 1945. Accompanying the writer and adventurer Robert Dean Frisbee, Neale was struck by the island's pristine beauty and its absolute isolation. Frisbee's romantic tales of island life only fueled Neale's imagination. It wasn't until years later, however, that he would muster the courage to turn his dream into reality. The journey to Suwarrow was treacherous. Aboard a creaky ship that groaned with every swell, Neale clung to his resolve. The atoll came into view after days of navigating through treacherous waters. It was a vision of paradise, a crescent-shaped strip of land encircling a lagoon, with dense coconut groves and pristine beaches. Yet beneath its beauty lay the harsh reality of solitude. As the ship departed, leaving Neale alone with his supplies and a heart full of anticipation, he felt an unsettling silence envelop him. There were no voices, no bustling streets, only the incessant cries of seabirds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was then that the weight of his decision truly dawned upon him. He was alone, entirely and utterly alone. Neale's first days on Suwarrow were anything but idyllic. The island's beauty masked its indifference to human life. Nature's bounty was abundant but not easily accessed. The coconuts that dotted the trees were tantalizingly out of reach, their husks stubborn and resistant. Fishing proved a challenge, as the lagoon's waters teemed with life but required skill and patience to yield sustenance. His initial shelter was rudimentary, a flimsy hut constructed from palm fronds and driftwood. It provided little protection from the tropical storms that lashed the island, leaving him soaked and shivering through the night. The mosquitoes were relentless, their bites a constant torment. Loneliness gnawed at his spirit. The absence of human contact was a void that no amount of natural beauty could fill. Neale often found himself talking aloud, his voice a weak substitute for conversation. He began to question his decision, his sanity even. Was it worth it? Could he endure? Slowly, Neale began to adapt. He devised tools to make his life easier: a spear for fishing, a ladder for harvesting coconuts, and traps for catching crabs. He cultivated a small garden, nurturing vegetables that would supplement his diet. His shelter evolved into a sturdy hut, fortified against the elements and adorned with little touches of home. Each small victory bolstered his confidence, a reminder that he could conquer the challenges of isolation. The lagoon became his lifeline, providing fish, clams, and the occasional turtle. He learned to read the rhythms of the island, understanding its moods and patterns. The tides dictated his activities, and the changing seasons became his calendar. Nature, once a formidable adversary, became an ally. Books, brought along in his initial supplies, were his escape. He devoured every page, letting the words transport him to distant worlds and eras. The written word became his companion, offering solace during the long, silent nights. Life on Suwarrow was not without its dangers. One fateful day, Neale slipped while climbing a coconut tree, plummeting to the ground and injuring his back. The pain was excruciating, and for days he lay immobile, his mind racing with fears of being unable to fend for himself. It was a stark reminder of the precariousness of his existence. There was no one to help, no one to save him. Then there was the storm, a cyclone that roared through Suwarrow with a fury Neale had never witnessed. The winds tore at his hut, ripping away its roof and scattering his belongings. The lagoon, usually so tranquil, became a churning maelstrom, its waves threatening to engulf the island. Neale clung to a tree, his body battered by wind and rain, praying that the island would endure. Both instances tested his resolve to the breaking point, but each time he emerged stronger, more determined to survive. He rebuilt his hut, tending to it with the care one might give to a cherished possession. He recovered from his injuries, though the scars served as a permanent reminder of his fragility. As Neale settled into his life on Suwarrow, he began to uncover its secrets. The atoll was not as uninhabited as he had believed. It bore traces of earlier settlers, rusted tools, crumbling stone structures, and the remnants of old gardens. These discoveries were a poignant reminder that others had come before him, drawn by the same allure of isolation, only to abandon it in the face of its challenges. Neale treated these remnants with reverence, incorporating some into his daily life. An old metal pot became invaluable for boiling water, while fragments of fishing nets were repurposed into traps. These artifacts connected him to a lineage of survival, a silent brotherhood of those who had dared to call Suwarrow home. Years passed, and Neale's life on Suwarrow took on a rhythm of its own. The solitude that had once seemed oppressive became a source of peace. He reveled in the simplicity of his existence, unburdened by the demands of modern life. The island became his companion, its every sound and scent as familiar as an old friend. Visitors were rare but cherished. Passing ships occasionally brought curious sailors who marveled at Neale's life and left him with supplies and news of the outside world. Their visits were fleeting, but they reminded Neale that he was not forgotten. Letters from friends carried by these visitors warmed his heart and connected him to a world that felt increasingly distant. Neale also documented his experience in a journal, meticulously recording the details of his life on Suwarrow. These writings would later form the basis of his memoir, An Island to Oneself, offering readers a glimpse into his extraordinary life. After many years, Neale's health began to falter. The isolation, though enriching, had taken its toll. Reluctantly, he left Suwarrow, returning to a society that seemed alien and overwhelming. The cacophony of voices, the blaring of car horns, and the press of crowds were an assault on his senses. Yet he carried with him the lessons of Suwarrow, a profound appreciation for life's simplicities and the resilience of the human spirit. Neale made several attempts to return to Suwarrow, each time with a deeper understanding of the island and himself. His later years were spent sharing his story, inspiring others to reflect on their connection to nature and the value of solitude. Today, Suwarrow remains a protected sanctuary, a fitting tribute to the man who dared to embrace its challenges. Thank you for watching this video. Hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more interesting videos.